Throughout most of its development, Sonic X-treme was worked on by a largely American staff at STI. Names like Ofer Elan, Chris Sen, and Christina Coffin should be familiar to those who have followed Sonic X-treme's development in the past. However, for a brief period in time, Sonic team member and game planner for Sonic 1, 2, and 3, and Knuckles, Hirokazu Yasuhara, was asked to produce some game design concepts for the troubled game's development. Sonic R and Sonic 3D Blast aside, these images mark the only time that Yasuhara worked on a 3D Sonic game. Hey everybody, I'm Garrulous64, and I make videos usually on the Garrulous64 channel, but today I'm here to read you this very interesting script about the history of the cancelled Sonic game, Sonic X-treme. And if you're a big fan of these cancelled projects like I am, you're gonna be extremely interested in this one, so stay tuned. Now with all that out of the way, let's examine some of this concept art and see what a 3D Sonic game from the original game's designer might have looked like. This first image here is a bit of an outlier as it's drawn at a different angle than most of the other drawings. In any case, it seems to be the opening scene of Jade Gully Zone, where you would have run down a path and presumably jumped over the fallen bridge, avoiding the spikes and crocodiles. There's also a key on a little bit of land sticking out of the water on the second path. It's hard to know if Sonic would have been free to jump between the two paths in this design, or if he would have been locked to a path similar to the Saturn game Bug. The rest of the level pages we'll be looking at have note pages to go along with them, but for some reason this first page has no accompanying notes page that details how its gimmicks or interactive bits would have worked. The next page is not too dissimilar to some of the automated sections of Green Grove from Sonic 3D Blast. Now you can also see how the rest of the pages are organized. The numbers on this page indicate an accompanying note on the following page. 1 shows off a loop in that signature Sonic style, 2 shows off how Sonic would run on a wall, 3 indicates a sideways loop, and finally 4 is the ramp, with a nice little Star Wars reference. Do you think Yasuhara is a prequel fan? These little Sonic doodles should be familiar to anyone who's looked into the development of Sonic 1, 2, or 3, as they're very reminiscent of the way that Yasuhara illustrated game concepts for those games, which of course includes his cute little doodles of Sonic. In this next area, the game opens up a bit. First, Sonic must make it past a collapsing bridge, then cross these platforms which sink into the water when stood on. This reveals a lower, more difficult path underwater where the player will have to avoid moving and stationary spikes while keeping an eye on how long they've been underwater. Just like the classics, Sonic would drown when underwater for too long and needed to surface or grab air bubbles to avoid death. Relatable. On the upper path, the player would encounter springs, called plungers in Yasuhara's notes, and these floating stones or wood tiles that Sonic could step on which would cause them to rotate. Or at least that's what it looks like. How this would have worked exactly is unfortunately unclear. The fourth page starts out with a little platforming via a breakable rock, which would have sent Sonic speeding down a slide controllable in 8 directions all the way to the loop-de-loop at the end and into a breakable wall. The last page in this act shows that Sonic would have continued sliding all the way up through the hole in the ground to level up, which shuts behind him. From there, the player would simply need to run up to the finishing sign and the level would end with Sonic automatically running through the gate. While reviewing these in an isometric view, we have to remember that Sonic X-treme had a third-person camera behind the player, which was likely locked in place hard-coded into the game. Though it's worth noting that some of X-treme's signature features, such as walking on the ceiling and perhaps the fisheye camera perspective, weren't taken into consideration when these designs were made. Let's skip ahead and look at Zone 2, which looks to be themed after a snowy forest. This, of course, would include slippery ice floors, followed by falling bridges and a pond frozen over that'll break when Sonic stands on it. Yasuhara also seems to have reused some gimmicks from Sonic 3, including the falling icicles that Sonic can jump on, and moving blocks that tend to appear in most Sonic games. The next page contains another narrow speed section with a loop-de-loop, likely intended to be fairly automated with just a handful of gimmicks thrown in. The third screen of Zone 2 Act 1 is a bit more interesting, featuring an avalanche, followed by a frozen pond, which leads up to a Mips bed? Maybe a little background is required here. Mips were creatures that in some Sonic X-treme storylines were being captured on their homeworld and turned into robots, much like the Good Doctor did with animals on his own world. I actually didn't know that. That's actually pretty cool. The last page we'll look at is for Zone 4 Act 2. This layout is missing its notes page, but it starts off with some stairs that lead to a vertical conveyor platform like we've seen in Labyrinth Zone from Sonic 1. There appear to be 3 paths to follow off the conveyor platforms, which lead to some spiky floor panels that move up and down and all around. and a couple of swinging spike balls as seen in Spring Yard Zone or Marble Garden Zone. The paths continue with what appears to be moving groups of blocks and spring or plunger floors, as Yasuhara calls them on other note pages. It was also said by Sega producer Mike Wallace that the Extreme team received the engine and tools from Nights into Dreams until Yuji Naka threatened to quit, at which point the tools were taken away. This, however, was refuted by both Naka and Christina Coffin of the Sonic Extreme Project Condor team. So while Hirokazu Yasuhara had provided the conceptual designs for Sonic Extreme, Sonic team head Yuji Naka was even less involved. And according to some sources at Sega of America, Sega of Japan had so little faith in the project that they didn't even plan to release Sonic Extreme in their home country. Which to me sounds like one of the biggest reasons why this thing faded into obscurity.
Character designer Masahiro Sugiyama, during a fit of boredom, programmed Sonic and Tails into 1995's Fighting Vipers for self-amusement. Fellow programmer Yu Suzuki took notice of this gag and passed it up to Sega AM2's head producer Hiroshi Kataoka, who in turn passed it to Sonic series producer Yuji Naka, who actually approved this idea against Kataoka's skepticism. Interestingly, whereas Kataoka's concern was putting Sonic's family-friendly characters in such violent circumstances, Naka's concern, as expressed in the February 1996 issue of Sega Saturn magazine, was whether or not they could pull off a smooth gaming experience, since Sonic had a big head and small arms. But of course, things would come around for the development team. Launched on May 1996 in Japan, Sonic the Fighters would mark the Sonic franchise's first debut in 3D. For the first few months of development, the players would only get glimpses of the game through screenshots focused on popular Sonic characters posing in 3D environments. Japanese players would finally be able to get their hands on the game on February 1996, when Sonic the Fighters would have a playable demo at the Amusement Machine Operators Union Show, often shortened to AOU Show. Here we can see screenshots from 3 stages: Aurora Icefield, Mushroom Hill, and Death Egg's Eye. Newcomers Bean the Dynamite and Bark the Polar Bear would make their debut here, though Bark's design is quite different from the final, and debatably more generic. Sega would eventually announce a Sega Saturn port of Sonic the Fighters, but this would fall through, and the game wouldn't see a home console port until its inclusion in the Sonic Gems collection, and its ports on PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade. But Sega wasn't done with putting the blue blur on the Saturn. Somewhere between the first and second quarter of 1996 was the start of another project, Sonic Saturn, a counterpart project to the infamous Sonic Extreme. Sonic Saturn's development life began within STI Burbank, a studio established under Sega Technical Institute by developers Peter Morawiecz, Adrian Steffens, and Howard Drawson. STI Burbank's goal was to compete with Nintendo's groundbreaking Super Mario 64, which meant adapting Sonic's classic formula into 3D. Graphically, the game would use sphere rendering technology, which keeps those pesky polygonal edges from showing, as seen by many 3D games of the era. While not much is known about Sonic Saturn's main gameplay loop, there is information on its bonus stages. This was Sonic Pool, a billiards minigame that involved Sonic using a spin dash to strike a ball, with the goal of getting the other 7 balls into portals within a given time limit. Alternatively, the player could push the balls around, but this was much slower. Following tradition, Sonic Pool has a variety of themes, including Egypt, Rome, snow, galaxy, and future. Unfortunately, due to Yuji Naka disliking the project, Sonic Saturn received little support. Because of this, Sonic Saturn's development remained largely static. At this point, STI Burbank was put in an unwinnable battle. Unable to make considerable progression on Sonic Saturn, but also unable to focus on any projects other than Sonic Saturn. This would eventually result in the cancellation of Sonic Saturn, followed by the closure of STI Burbank in December of 1996. Before STI Burbank's demise, Sonic Pool's addition to Sonic Extreme was considered. In a Sonic Retro interview with Christina Coffin, lead developer on Sonic Extreme, she mentioned that while both Sonic Saturn and Sonic Extreme shared similar art styles, STI Burbank's sphere-rendered Sonic contrasted so much with Extreme's pre-rendered Sonic that everything ended up getting ported over except for the Blue Hedgehog himself. Without having access to the source code, Christina instead recreated both the gameplay and the sphere rendering technology for Sonic Pool. At the end of the Blue Blur's journey on the Saturn sits Sonic R. Initially started by British studio Traveller's Tales as a Formula 1 racing game designed to compete with a game also called Formula 1 on the original PlayStation, this project would undergo a new creative direction as Sonic R, following a mandate by Sega to compensate for Sonic Extreme's cancellation. The project was referred to as Sonic TT for a while, a reference to the terms Time Trial, Tourist Trophy, along with Sega's own Manx TT Superbike. John Burton, head of Traveller's Tales, now TT Games, and YouTube channel Game Hut has published videos showcasing the oldest builds of the game. First is Prototype 0.1. There are no characters. There's only a first-person perspective. This has minimal texture work and no sky texture. Movement is currently limited to just a rail that goes around the track. Next is Prototype 0.2. At this point, there are character models. The models are not animated. For unknown reasons, Sonic's model is flickering. The game is still on a rail. The game has a Sonic model with a metallic texture used to test environment mapping on characters, but this was only used for the trophy and title screen. You cannot collect rings. Interestingly, the background for Resort Island is taken from Miggy Mania, another Traveller's Tales game. Next is Prototype 0.3. The game is no longer on rails, but there's still no animations for the characters. Following this, there are now secret areas. There's now a collect animation for rings. There's simple AI for opponent racers. During development, Sonic Team would design the tracks on paper, followed by Traveller's Tales interpreting the drawings into 3D. The game originally had a mirror mode that flipped the tracks, but this mode was scrapped when the draw code would have to be rewritten to accommodate this feature. Sonic R would be shown at E3 1997, where studio head John Burton would recall people giving up when they fell into the water due to Sonic's speed being greatly reduced under such conditions. In response to this, Sonic's underwater speed was sped up. Have you ever wondered why the item boxes in classic Sonic games look like computer monitors? The explanation for the screens has changed quite a bit between the comics and games, and the appearance of the item boxes themselves has also evolved over time. But if we go all the way back to the beginning, there's actually a cool lore reason for the random monitors everywhere. Before the events of Sonic the Hedgehog, there was a kind, good-natured scientist named Dr. Avi Kintober. For 15 years, the scientist had a single mission: to capture and neutralize all of the evil on the planet Mobius. To do this, he obtained 6 Chaos Emeralds with the intention of infusing them with all the planet's evil, but they were too unstable on their own. He needed a 7th gem, the Gray Chaos Emerald, to balance out the others and accomplish his mission. However, finding the 7th Chaos Emerald turned out to be a tall order. The search was too much for Avi to handle on his own, so he installed special PCs all throughout Mobius as a public bulletin board service. The citizens of Mobius were free to use the PCs to share information that might lead Kintober to the Gray Chaos Emerald. Unfortunately, something happened before the 7th Chaos Emerald could be located. A mishap in Avi Kintober's lab resulted in his amazing transforming machine combining the good doctor with the evil of the 6 Chaos Emeralds, as well as the general shape and disposition of a rotten egg he was holding, turning him into the evil Dr. Ivo Robotnik. After that event, the PCs remained in their places around Mobius, but the information they contained and the network that connected them were wiped out. Instead, the PCs were mysteriously filled with a variety of magical objects, what we know as power-ups. That wild lore comes straight from the Sonic the Hedgehog Bible, an internal document that Sega of America developed around the release of the original game. The most completed versions of the document are dated June 24th, 1991, just one day after Sonic the Hedgehog released in North America. Although the Sonic Bible was made by Sega of America, its content was hardly used for the Sonic media produced in the country. Even the Sonic the Hedgehog game manual refers to item boxes as video monitors rather than PCs, but it's possible that the manual text was finalized before the Sonic Bible was turned in. Instead, the events and general structure of the Sonic Bible's lore were heavily adopted by Europe, where it quickly became the backbone of all the media produced in that region. While the content from the Sonic Bible has definitely made an impression in Sonic media in some places around the world, it's important to note that it was not recognized officially by Sonic Team. Sega of Japan had their own ideas regarding Sonic lore, and we covered that craziness in an earlier video. The 1991 promotional comic for Sonic the Hedgehog covers the same story as the Sonic Bible, but renames the amazing transforming machine to the Retro-Orbital Chaos Compressor, or ROC. It also doesn't explicitly feature or explain the PC item boxes in any capacity, although there is a similar looking screen that shows how fast Sonic runs on the supersonic treadmill. In January 1993, just 2 months after the simultaneous worldwide release of Sonic 2, the Stay Sonic guidebook written by Mike Pattenden was published in the UK. It used the same modified lore from the promotional comic regarding the ROC, and it also expanded on the existence of the PCs on Mobius and how they got there. This was the first time Sonic fans learned about Avi Kentober's planet-wide PC bulletin board system. In the early 2000s, Sonic the Comic featured appearances by PC item boxes. They have the same origin and background that was covered in Stay Sonic, and they even had an interesting storyline attached to them. In Sonic the Comic number 13, Double Trouble, it's revealed that Avi Kentober created a duplicate of Sonic that was stored inside a PC item box. The duplicate, known as Extra Life, was trapped in the PC for years, causing it to become angry and evil. It wreaks havoc on Emerald Hill Zone after it fools Tails into setting it free, but Tails sets things right again by capturing it in an empty PC. Then Sonic kicks it into space. The appearance of PC/video monitor style item boxes has subtly evolved over time. For instance, Sonic 1, 2, CD, Chaotix, 3D Blast, and Mania's item boxes are based on CRT monitors. The ones in Sonic 3 and Knuckles look like older Mac screens, and Sonic the Hedgehog 4's item boxes look like more modern flat-screen TVs. Item boxes have changed more drastically over time to resemble the containment bubbles from Sonic Adventure, and those have even received their own origins in the comics as well. In the Archie Comics Sonic canon, they were created by Hope Kentober, the niece of Avi Kentober, for use by Gun in storing power-ups like the Flame Shield. They are also directly referenced as containment bubbles in the IDW Publishing Sonic comics. Apparently, early in Sonic's career, he had a spider sense-like ability that triggered a sneeze when danger was near. This obscure detail about Sonic's character was brought to light in 2020 on Twitter. SegaBits.com engaged in some discussion about odd Sonic the Hedgehog 2 pins. One of the pins featured Sonic, where he seems to be sneezing on Tails. Twitter user RainandWise shed light on the situation. It was an early Sonic thing that he'd sneeze when danger was approaching. The most prominent evidence lies in the intro sequence of Sonic CD. The twitch some fans mistook for surprise? It's actually a slow-motion sneeze, just as rocks tumble towards Sonic. The game even featured unused sprites of Sonic sneezing in-game. Some fans have speculated that Sonic's attempts at rubbing his nose in the Sonic the Movie or Sonic OVA are an effort to avert a sneeze, and another reference to this sense. The Sonic team did work closely with the producers of the OVA, so it is definitely a possibility. Are you familiar with the Sonic arcade games? Mainly Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, Sega Sonic Popcorn Machine, or the cancelled Sega Sonic Bros? Well, whether you are or not, you might be wondering why they all include the word Sega with Sonic. His name isn't Sega Sonic the Hedgehog after all. Well, the details are a bit unclear, but apparently there was some dispute over the Sonic the Hedgehog trademark. According to gaming journalist John Szczepaniak, Sega of America had failed to submit proper paperwork for the trademark, causing a potential lapse. So, had it not been for this legal kerfuffle, we might actually have had a third game simply titled Sonic the Hedgehog. I suppose we'd be calling it Sonic Arcade if that had happened. Speaking of Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, according to European gaming magazine Mean Machine Sega, the game was going to be ported to the Sega 32X. Since Sega Sonic the Hedgehog was developed by AM3 instead of the usual Sonic team, it has some interesting ties to Sega's legacy. For instance, one of Sega's serving composers, Hiroshi Kawaguchi, worked on part of the soundtrack for Sega Sonic. If that name isn't immediately familiar, he also worked on the soundtrack for Sega's arcade legends, such as Hang On, Outrun, and Fantasy Zone. Masahiro Hoshino's first contribution to the Sonic title was on Sega Sonic as well. He would go on to do character design work for Sonic Adventure DX and gameplay design for Sonic Riders. Electronic Gaming Monthly was oddly enamored with the game too, it seems, scoring it a 10 out of 10, a higher score than some of the mainline games have gotten from them, stating that the game shatters your perception of what a good game should be. Continuing with our Sega Sonic arcade kick, Sonic series writer Ian Flynn was asked about the placement of Sega Sonic on a theoretical Sonic timeline. Flynn stated that it was after Sonic R and Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Probably before Other M too. Leave a comment if you got that one. Knuckles' origins began with an internal design competition at Sega. The winner of the competition was Takashi Yuta, a Sega of Japan veteran that had moved to the United States along with Yuji Naka to work at the Sega Technical Institution and was now working on Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Takashi initially envisioned a green, spiny creature, and his design resonated well with a group of children Sega used in a focus test, solidifying the concept. Takashi's initial design was worked and reworked by Takashi and Sega of America product marketing manager Pamela Kelly, with input from the Sonic team. Yuta originally intended Knuckles to be a friend for Sonic. However, during development, the idea shifted, making Knuckles a rival instead. Early concept art showcases a range of designs. Some depict Knuckles as a mole-like creature, complete with sunglasses, perhaps hinting at poor eyesight. Other sketches portray a feline character. Knuckles was intended to have a whirlwind move that would break walls before that ability was given to his fists. Eventually, Knuckles' green color was later swapped for red, likely to avoid him getting lost in the lush green environments common in Sonic games. Red is also a color commonly associated with strength and power, a character motif that complemented Sonic's speedy nature. The white chestplate Knuckles sports holds a unique place in his design history. Rumors suggest it originated from a marketing deal with a popular shoe brand, possibly Nike. While this remains unconfirmed, the chestplate does resemble the Nike swoosh and undeniably adds a touch of flair to his character design.
Sonic Triple Trouble was developed by Aspect as a sequel to the earlier Game Gear and Master System game, Sonic Chaos. We'll be talking about two versions of Sonic Triple Trouble in this video. the first being the well-known and official Sega Game Gear release, and the second being a fan-created reimagining for Windows PC and Android. The game's Japanese name reflects this lineage better, bearing the title Sonic and Tails 2. Aspect Co. is a company Sonic fans should be familiar with. In addition to developing Sonic Triple Trouble and its predecessor Sonic Chaos, they also developed Sonic 2's 8-bit version and Tails Adventure for the Game Gear, but more on that another time. In addition to the name change, the title screen between Sonic and Tails 2 and Sonic Triple Trouble has been completely redone, sporting a different Sonic pose, removing Tails, and adding Knuckles. Triple Trouble introduces a new antagonist to the Sonic the Hedgehog series, Knack the Weasel, aka Fang the Sniper in Japan. Knack was designed by Shinji Higashi, otherwise known as Toma, a well-regarded character artist in Japan who at the time worked for Sega. Interesting to note that Higashi designed a popular line of figures, several of which have an appearance similar to Knack. Knack would go on to make appearances in Sonic the Fighters and Sonic Drift 2. His likeness would appear in Sonic Mania, but not the true character. Since the Master System and Game Gear share much of the same hardware, it's relatively easy to port games between the two systems. As a consequence, every 8-bit Sonic platformer was released on both systems in some form or another. From Sonic 1 to Sonic Blast, every 8-bit game was released on both systems in one region or another. This is with the exception of Sonic Triple Trouble. Prototype materials and magazines suggest it was once to be ported to the Master System, but for whatever reason this didn't happen. In spite of no official Master System port, in 2009 a port of Triple Trouble was made to the Master System. This port was made by hacking scene member Glitch. While the conversion to the Master System does mean the game can make use of fewer colors, the larger resolution and ability to play on a TV make this a fair trade-off. Many other Master System conversions have been made for Game Gear games. Perhaps we'll take a look at them in a future video. There is unused cover art for Triple Trouble by the legendary Greg Martin, known for drawing cover art for many video game franchises in the 1990s, including drawing the cover art for Sonic 2, the 16-bit version, Sonic Chaos, Sonic Spinball, Pac-Man and Mrs. Pac-Man on the Sega Genesis and Game Boy, and many others. Archie Comics had a long-standing monthly Sonic the Hedgehog series between the years of 1993 and 2017. As part of that series, Sonic Triple Trouble was adapted into a 48-page Super Sonic special. The story of the comic only loosely follows the game, involving Dr. Robotnik accidentally splitting a Chaos Emerald in half and hiring Knack the Weasel to retrieve them. After splitting, one of the halves of the emerald causes new zones to appear. These new zones are the levels from the game, and the comic features a brief montage of Sonic traversing through all the zones of the game. Meanwhile, the other half of the emerald falls on the floating island, and Knuckles is warned to retrieve it by ancient beings, because should the emerald half meet the Master Emerald, it could destroy the floating island. Eventually, Knack captures Sonic and heads to the floating island to nab the second half of the emerald. There he runs into Knuckles, who punches him in the face and frees Sonic. But Sonic, unaware of his captor, assumes it to be Knuckles, and the pair get into a fight. The two soon realize that Knack is working for Robotnik and work together to subdue their new enemy.
ソニックとテイルズがまだまだゲームギアで大暴れドクターエッグマンラッスルズそして新キャラファング盛りだくさんで最新作ソニック&テイルズ2
Fair warning at this part of the video, since Sonic Triple Trouble 16-bit is a new release, there will be spoilers and secrets from the game ahead. You have been warned. While there is limited information on the development of the original Triple Trouble for Game Gear, that is not such with the unofficial remake. This is particularly due to the fact the game was created by friend and voice of the channel Noah Copeland. While the following information about the Triple Trouble remake is accurate, not all of it is sourced outside of this video. During an interview with the podcast, Procedurally Generated, Noah was asked why he chose to remake Sonic Triple Trouble. Noah stated that his reasons were that it would translate best to Genesis-style gameplay. Because of all the 8-bit Sonic titles, it was closest to capturing the 16-bit gameplay. Originally, Noah intended to make the levels of the game very faithful to the original, reasoning that the level maps were roughly half the size of the Genesis level maps, and scaling the 8-bit maps by 2 and redrawing them with Genesis-style graphics would do the job. The translation did not go as expected. The physics of the Sonic Genesis games were different enough that doing a one-to-one translation of the stages resulted in stages that weren't fit for the physics and were not enjoyable to play. Thus Noah forged ahead with a new direction, reimagining each stage for the 16-bit version, leading to levels that match the flow of the original game, but include a lot of detail and gimmicks not found in the original. There is a second origin to the Triple Trouble remake. Another friend of the channel, D Lightears, has been making pixel art for 16-bit versions of Triple Trouble since 2010, with the intent of someday finding an engine and making a game out of these concepts and tiles. The team up of Noah Copeland and D Lightears gave Noah the art he needed to make his Triple Trouble remake a reality, and over the next 5 years he did just that. Lightears is responsible for much of the art in Triple Trouble, and she previously contributed to another unofficial Sonic game, Sonic Time Twisted. She mentioned that Sunset Park and Meta Jungle Zone were the first two tile sets conceptualized. Robotnik Winter and Tidal Plant were the most difficult levels to reimagine, requiring the assistance of additional artists. While the game was largely programmed, designed, and scored by Noah Copeland, with art help from D Lightears, they had support from some long-standing members of the Sonic fan game community. Sprite artist Dolphman, a longtime member of Sonic Retro and the Spriters resource communities, provided many of the 16-bit versions of Triple Trouble's Badniks, item sprites, and other various level graphics and touch-ups. Vector Satire, creator of the movement engine that powered Sonic Time Twisted, and a longtime Sonic scener, consulted on the technical aspects of this project. Popular hacking scene chiptune artist Johnny Tay and DV2 also participated by providing additional tracks for the game. In the 8-bit game, Knack was originally intended to be featured in levels outside of the special stages. While this did not happen, the remake implements this idea by reimagining each of Knack's fights as a mini-boss in the game's proper levels. There is one zone in Triple Trouble 16 that isn't found in the original Game Gear title. That is the single act of Egg Zeppelin, in which Sonic boards a giant Zeppelin of Robotnik's making and destroys it before landing in Robotnik Winter. There is also a hidden zone in Triple Trouble 16. In the original Triple Trouble, the special stages are a mix of these purple rune-style stages and pseudo 3D flight stages using sprite scaling. These purple rune stages are replaced in the remake with a foot race in 3D against Knack that wouldn't look too out of place on a real Genesis. Aside from these special stages looking really cool, this left no use for the purple rune-style special stages. That's why here, in the Triple Trouble remake, it's a hidden zone. The zone is accessed much in the same way that the Hidden Palace zone is accessed in the Sonic 2 remake for Android and iOS, and now in Sonic Origins. To access this zone, just go to the save point before the boss in Robotnik Winter. Run to the left and jump off the cliff. You'll now land in a new zone, Purple Palace Zone. Very cool. Speaking of special stages, one interesting fact is that the idea to retry special stages by spending a life had previously been adapted into fellow fan game Sonic Time Twisted. It's possible that the concept of spending lives to retry special stages also inspired the ability to spend coins to retry special stages in the anniversary mode of Sonic Origins. This idea of spending lives in special stages to retry them originated with One Mercury Silver, one of the developers behind Sonic Time Twisted and Sonic Fan Remix. During development, Noah took great care to limit the color palettes and effects to only what could be reasonably recreated on a real Sega Genesis. Noah wanted the game to feel like a continuation of Sonic 3 and Knuckles down to using enhanced versions of the Sonic 3 sprites and preserving the 4:3 aspect ratio for those who prefer it. The soundtrack for the original Triple Trouble was composed by Yayoi Fujimori. For the reimagining, Noah remixed all the game's original soundtrack using VSTs for emulating the Sega Genesis sound chip, making the game's soundtrack authentic to the capabilities of the Sega Genesis sound hardware. Some of the additional composers on the reimagining soundtrack made use of Deflict Mask, which can output sound data to real Sega Genesis hardware. Like many fan games, Triple Trouble 16-bit reuses graphics from some of the official series. It also borrows graphics from 2 cancelled Sega Technical Institute games. The background tiles from Meta Jungle come from a cancelled Tales spin-off game called Treasure Tales. The rocket ship that takes the player to Atomic Destroyer is a reused asset from a cancelled video game called Spinny and Spike. There's a badnik from Atomic Destroyer Zone that was intended for the original game, but was cut for unknown reasons. A 16-bit version of this enemy was created for the 16-bit remake and was given an attack in which the badnik shoots small missiles at the player. To promote the launch of the remake, a comic was created to provide backstory for the 3 villains of the game. Noah also created some 1990s style advertisements for the game, which you can see now.
When Sega approached Masato Nakamura to compose the soundtrack for Sonic 2, Nakamura felt his work was worth more than what he had been paid to work on Sonic 1. According to those close to the project, way more. Nakamura became prohibitively expensive for Sega, and since he and his band owned the rights to the music from the first game, Sega had to look elsewhere for the game's music. They initially tried to make music in-house, but what they received wasn't really up to snuff. In a 2017 interview, Yasushi Yamaguchi recalled hearing that music for the first time. That reminds me, the music for Sonic 2 was completely different at first. Someone working in America, an American, came to us and asked us to use this music, but all of the tracks were awful, so together we rejected all of them. Yes, for Sonic 2. The tracks were just no good, so we called and explained how bad they were, and in the end, we were allowed to use Dreams Come True. Whatever they were given was reportedly bad enough to warrant Nakamura's price tag, so the artist was able to begin composing the new soundtrack fairly early in development, using only concept art as a frame of reference. According to Nakamura in a 2021 interview with Billboard Japan, he wanted to compose Sonic's music, quote, as if it were a movie, and capture the essence of the cinematic material he was presented with. That's how we got incredible tracks for Sonic 2, like the zone music for Chemical Plant Zone. Nakamura composed Sonic 2 jointly with Dreams Come True's 1992 album, The Swinging Star, so he decided to do something special for the developers he was working so closely with. He produced an alternate version of Sonic 2's ending theme song, Sweet Sweet Sweet, with lyrics. But what about the American, whose music was unceremoniously thrown out? Well, it turns out that American was David Javalosa, who was a composer at Sega of America at the time. Was his music really that bad? You be the judge. This is a portion of the music Javalosa created, which he himself uploaded to his YouTube channel in 2019. He has also uploaded other work he's done for Sega on the Sonic franchise, including some music for Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine.
Earlier this year, GameFAQs Special uploaded the biggest, most in-depth video we've ever made, the definitive development history of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It took roughly 4 months to research and write, and another 2 to record and edit, and the GFS team really pushed themselves to make the best, most complete, most accurate deep dive we could possibly make. And guess what? We still got a bunch wrong. Thankfully, our audience is always right there to call us out on our mistakes and occasionally kick us while we're down. So, after a long break, we're back to address those errors with the help of the comments section. To everyone who watched, liked, and commented on the video, thank you. It means the world to us, and we're working on more content just like this. So make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. And now let's correct some mistakes and see if we can have some fun along the way. Regarding the unused Winter Zone we mentioned, we got a few comments that provided some information as well as context. These viewers informed us that the true identity of the mysterious stage is the Rock World Zone area that appears in a few places. We were able to confirm this with the cutting room floor, so the book is closed on that. As for Brawl Sonic's Blue Lake Zone level slot discrepancy, we weren't able to confirm that information with any of our sources. If you have a concrete source for that information, we would love it if you could share it with us. Not Dynamite Duck took notice of our sick Eggman burn, thank you for noticing. And Robintist was pretty brave to post this comment making fun of Yasuhara's legendary drawings. How dare you mock the great Yasuhara! Silver Amy Nux 241 left us a Sonic animated series related comment that really got us thinking. Could Scratch and Clucker actually be the same character? There's no way to confirm this that we could find, but all signs do point to the fact that Scratch and Grounder in Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog were pulled straight from Sonic 2's early development. If you recall, Sega provided early development materials to DiC Entertainment, which they used to create the show's characters. With that in mind, it's definitely possible that Clucker's original name was Scratch, and that's why they were used for the show. Grounder's consistent name and design, minus his color across the game and shows, also makes this plausible. Further evidence that supports this theory comes from DiC Entertainment's The Adventures of Super Mario 3 cartoon, where all the Koopa kids have unique names that differ from their official ones. For example, we have Cheatsy instead of Larry, Bully instead of Roy, Cootie Pie instead of Wendy O. Koopa, and Big Mouth instead of Morton, but definitely not the Big Mouth you're thinking of. Believe me, we want nothing to do with that. And with that in mind, and seeing as the show predates Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog and SatAM by 3 years, there's definitely precedent for naming shenanigans happening over there at DiC Entertainment. Now, as for Clucker's decidedly legless appearance in the game versus the long-legged version that appears in Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, that could either be the animators having some fun, or there's a completely different design for the character that somehow hasn't surfaced yet. Maybe time will tell. And as long as we're talking about Scratch and Grounder, here's a fun fact for you. They actually traded voice actors early in production. This was revealed in a tweet by Grounder's VA, Gary Chalk, who said that the producer of the show hated the original incarnations of those characters and threatened to fire them if they didn't come up with something better. So they switched characters, came up with new voices, and the rest is history. That's really amazing also. I cannot imagine those characters having any different voices than what they have now. They are iconic. Agent Lazarus might have one of the final remaining holographic Sonic 2 labels in existence. If you have access to this, we hope you'll share it eventually. Everyone else, keep an eye on Agent Lazarus' channel for what might be a preserved piece of Sonic history. T-List94 posted this interesting hypothetical. How different would Sonic 2 have been if Sega had given Sonic Team the green light earlier? It's difficult to say, really. We like to think that if Sonic 2 had those 2 extra months of development, some of the awesome stuff that was scrapped would have made it into the final game. However, there's no guarantee that Sonic 2 would have turned out any different with that extra time because game development is an unpredictable beast. It's a wonder that any game releases in a decent enough state, so when we get masterpieces like Sonic 2, which are unfortunately few and far between these days, we can't really take them for granted. Are the Turtle Badniks a monster movie reference? This is definitely possible, Jacob, but by that logic, Boomer could also have been a reference to Gamera. Maybe Craig Stitt is an undercover weeb. But then again, your perspective of things might be a little skewed, don't you think, Jacob Kaiju? These two viewers seem to think that the unused concepts for a circus-themed zone were repurposed for Sonic Superstars. At first glance, we can agree on this idea. Looking into the Sonic Superstars Pinball Carnival Zone, it definitely seems to have plenty of roller coasters and unsettling clowns, which fits the bill of Craig's description. But was bringing Craig's concept to life over 30 years later really the intent, or did someone else just have a similar idea and they were able to make it happen? I mean, it's not as if carnivals are no longer a common theme in media or even real life at this point. After digging a little bit deeper, we found out that Sonic Superstars was developed 100% by Arzest with some oversight by Sonic Team. The interesting thing here is that Arzest is the game studio founded by Naoto Oshima, who we know as the, or one of the, depending on who you ask, creators of Sonic. But if you recall from the original video, Oshima never actually worked on Sonic 2. He stayed in Japan to work on Sonic CD, so while there's no way to confirm or deny it, it's highly unlikely that he had any contact with Craig Stitt, and the language barrier alone would have made discussing a vague idea basically impossible. Now, could Craig's idea have been passed through the grapevine of the Japanese staff and made it to either Oshima or someone on Sonic Team and then survived 31 years in their memory until it could be created? I don't know, maybe. Ratchet & Clank 14 took time out of their day to leave this comment about our description of a stage hazard in Metropolis Zone. Seems like a weird distinction to make, but okay. AstroTibs left this fantastically helpful comment. Thanks for this, AstroTibs. In my book, a frog is a frog and it's a win either way. GCole01 brings up a very good question here. We told him how many people watched the video and didn't subscribe. He still looks like that now. On another note, we appreciate the Macross reference. That just happens to be Overbound's favorite anime. Ignoring the tone, this was the comment that gave us the idea for this video in the first place. Let's dig into the points being made. While Madness Mountain doesn't appear on any timeline documents, Dust Hill Zone does, which both Sonic Retro and the Cutting Room Floor believe to be the predecessor to Mystic Cave Zone. The cutting room floor also believes that Madness Mountain concept art is connected to Dust Hill, possibly an earlier version of it, although that remains unconfirmed. The fact that medieval was a misleading translation unfortunately didn't come up in our research, but that does seem to be the case. As far as comparing Madness Mountain to Marble Zone, they look similar. Brick, sconces, spikes, even the view through the window in this concept art is comparable to what you see at the beginning of Marble Zone. If you darken the color palette of Madness Mountain concept art, it would pass as a concept from Marble Zone. Mentioning Sand Shower transforming into Winter Zone halfway through was the result of a quote from an interview that we weren't able to find at the time of this scripting. If no one else has a source on that, we can safely retract that statement and acknowledge it as an error. We've already addressed Rock World / Winter Zone. Parts of Genocide City being used for Metropolis Act 3 was attributed to a quote from Tom Payne, who worked on both zones. New information does suggest that the two levels could have coexisted. We mentioned that Brenda's name had changed since Sonic 2 was developed the first time she came up in the script. Referring to her as Brenda Ross was done to maintain consistency with the sources being used. Yasuhara referred to the finale of Sonic 2, meaning Death Egg Zone, as the last battle in space during his Digital Dragons presentation. Others have speculated that the bizarre unused dragon shown in a brief glimpse of concept art during the MTV special was meant to be Doomsday Zone. Yuji Naka talked about Hidden Palace being where Sonic would become Super Sonic after collecting all of the Chaos Emeralds in a 2005 interview with GameSpy. We believe this is the layout concept art that Cat Ann mentioned at the end of their comment, and is admittedly pretty awesome. It's a shame we missed that for the initial video, but thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Sonic 3 almost had a much wider variety of elemental shields to play with. While the final game only featured fire, bubble, and lightning shields, these development documents reveal a treasure trove of unused ideas. Thanks to YouTube commenter Void Rocks to Place, we found another commenter, CodeHK, who translated 2 pages of shield ideas from their original Japanese. Let's go through them all and see what shields were considered for Sonic 3. Flame Shield offers a basic attack, but its purpose seems limited compared to others. Fire Shield, the classic we know, letting you walk on lava and avoid fire damage. Bubble Shield allows for underwater exploration without needing to breathe. Water Shield makes Sonic a speed demon underwater, perfect for aquatic sections. Wheel Shield boosts Sonic's acceleration for quick bursts of speed. Mirror Shield deflects incoming projectiles, a great defensive tool. Magnet Shield sticks to metal surfaces, potentially for unique platforming challenges. Thunder Shield unleashes a powerful electric blast that clears all enemies, but requires a recharge. Enemy Shield. This one's interesting. It likely became Hyper Tails' ability to home in on enemies. Block Shield provides a shield that can withstand multiple hits, proportional to the number of blocks used. Heavy Shield slows Sonic down, perhaps for a strategic puzzle-solving element. Wing Shield enhances Sonic's jumping ability for reaching higher platforms. Iron Ball Shield executes a wide-range attack, useful for crowd control. Ring Shield passively generates rings at set intervals, a nice way to boost your ring count. Brake Shield allows Sonic to come to a complete stop instantly, potentially for precision platforming. Spin Shield lets Sonic stay curled up indefinitely, possibly for burrowing or defense. These unused shields offer a glimpse into what could have been for Sonic 3. They introduce a variety of offensive, defensive, and movement-based abilities, adding a layer of strategic choice to gameplay. While some might seem overpowered or gimmicky, others could have opened doors for creative level design and unique challenges. Back during the development of the first game, Sonic wasn't just supposed to go fast. Part of the original game concept envisioned the protagonist with the ability to pick up and throw objects at enemies. And at one point, Sonic could actually do that. However, that was only possible because he was a very different character. Literally. When Sega's AM8 division, now known as Sonic Team, was tasked with sifting through internal competition submissions for an appropriate animal character that could become Sega's mascot, they saw ideas for just about every animal under the sun. One design that stood above the rest was an early creation of a 26-year-old character designer at Sega named Naoto Oshima, a 1930s-style cartoon rabbit. Doesn't he look like he was ripped right out of Cuphead? Felix Feel the Rabbit, as he had come to be known by the Sonic community, was an early frontrunner, and he definitely fit the bill for Yuji Naka's game concept. Rabbits are known to be fast, and his characteristic long ears could be used to pick up and hurl objects. Unfortunately for Felix, it was determined by the dev team that the pick up and throw mechanic would have complicated and slowed down the gameplay, which broke the two cardinal rules of the project. So, it was dropped in favor of the jump/bounce attack suggested by Hirokazu Yasuhara. Oshima later redesigned the protagonist into the Hedgehog we know and love, and the rest is history. The concept for Felix the Rabbit and his unique gameplay mechanic was later revisited for a Sega prototype called Feel, which became Ristar. Later in Sonic the Hedgehog's development, one of the power-ups planned for the game was a set of goggles. An unused image of a goggles monitor has been found in the game's files, and many believe that they could have been intended as a way for Sonic to hold his breath underwater for longer, similar to how the Aqua Shield functions in Sonic 3 and later installments. It's possible they would have been able to be used in Sonic 1's Labyrinth Zone, the only water level in the game. The goggle monitor reappeared as a placeable object in the debug mode of the 2013 Sonic the Hedgehog remake, and the goggles themselves are worn during the plane segments of Sonic Mania. We covered the development of Sonic 2 in depth in a previous GameFAQs special, and in that video, we mentioned the existence of a wall bounce or rebound mechanic that was scrapped pretty early in development. When Sonic collided with a wall at high speed in the Nick Arcade prototype, he would bounce off, land flat on the ground, and pick himself back up. The mechanic and its associated animations are only present in the Nick Arcade prototype, and do not appear in later prototypes. However, the Getting Up sprite did make it into the final game. It appears whenever Sonic transitions out of his idle animation. Of course, we can't talk about Sonic 2 without mentioning our favorite scrapped turtle companion, Boomer. When Boomer was being conceptualized, the team came up with several moves that would be exclusive to the character. One of them was a flying maneuver that could only be accomplished if Sonic pushed the turtle fast enough to activate it. It was a cool idea, but it also would have meant bringing the fast-paced gameplay to a grinding halt, so it was scrapped along with Boomer. Rest in peace, turtle friend. One last tidbit for Sonic 2. Tails' propeller flight move was probably intended to be used by the player at some point. The character uses that move when it's controlled by AI, but the player can't use it in the original release. Propeller flight became a regular feature for Tails in the Sonic games and spin-offs that followed, as well as Sonic Origins and the mobile remake version of Sonic 2. In early prototypes for Sonic 3, the Blue Blur had a couple of abilities that were later scrapped. The first was an air dash move, which would allow Sonic to get a boost in any direction by pressing the A button and a direction after jumping. It's clear that this move was cut early though, because using it in the November 3rd, 1993 prototype results in the camera losing track of Sonic. There was also a ring throw move that could have been intended as an offensive projectile. Only present in the November 3rd, 1993 prototype, pressing the B button while jumping would cause Sonic to throw a ring in the direction he was facing. If you pressed the C button in the air, he would throw rings in both directions. Using this move doesn't subtract from the total ring count, and it can even be used to collect other rings. The drop dash that became prominent in later Sonic games also first appeared in this prototype before being scrapped, and that could be activated by holding up on the D-pad during a jump. There is also this sprite of Sonic whistling. Perhaps it would have been used to call Tails back to Sonic when he went off screen. In March 2022, an internal Sega Technical Institute document dated April 12, 1993 was leaked. This document was intended to introduce Knuckles as a character back before his name had officially been settled on. There are some pretty interesting pieces of information in this document, including the reveal that Knuckles was intended to have a whirlwind move that could break down walls and find hidden routes. This ability isn't present in the final game, but the Knuckles Sonic 3 Happy Meal toy shows what the move may have looked like.
Sonic the Hedgehog has made numerous cameo appearances across various anime. Some of these appearances are pretty obscure in the West. Fortunately, Sonic researcher Juice the Hedgehog has curated a list of these cameos for us to check out today. The first notable appearance is in a high school Sasha Girl, where Sonic appears multiple times, particularly in episode 7. His statue is also present in the classroom throughout the series. Additionally, Sonic makes an appearance in Dengenke Bunko Fighting Complex Ignition, a crossover fighting game. Beyond these, Sonic appears in the highly obscure NEC PC98 game A Hard Day's Night. This reference is so hidden it's almost never discussed in gaming circles. Another fascinating connection is oh boy, this is gonna be a real one. Oi Sekai no Chushin, or World War Blue translated. An anime adaptation of a manga where the main protagonist, Gear, is directly inspired by Sonic. The series portrays a console war allegory, with characters representing major gaming brands. Juice warned me that the anime contains mature content, so keep that in mind if you're gonna search it out. Sonic cameos are also present in Ben 2, an anime about supermarket brawls over discount food. Additionally, Sekai Oji-san, or Uncle from Another World, references Sonic in multiple episodes. Western media isn't exempt from Sonic tributes either. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off includes multiple Sonic references. Meanwhile, Hyperdimension Neptunia features nods to both Sonic and Mario. Finally, High School Girl, an anime celebrating classic arcade culture, includes a Sonic cameo. There were 16 unused elemental shield ideas for Sonic 3, and you can learn all about that in our Unused Shield episode. In the 1990s, Sonic's movement in his Genesis games was something to marvel at, and not something any other game could really reproduce faithfully. For a time, even Sega seemed to have forgotten how to implement Sonic's physics the way that Sonic had them back in his original Genesis outings, with the last game to use anything close to classic Sonic physics for some time being the Sonic Advance series. These physics were and remain pretty important to get right for die-hard classic Sonic fans, and fans campaigned for a long time to have them reintroduced into the series. Fortunately today, how to implement Sonic physics in that classic Genesis Mega Drive style has been preserved, largely thanks to the work of one person, Devin Reeves, aka Mercury Silver. Mercury took the time to meticulously document Sonic's classic physics on the Sonic Retro Wiki way back in the year of 2009. Thanks to his efforts, fan games were able to implement accurate Sonic physics to the point where most of them feel pretty much like those earliest Sonic games nowadays. We don't want to take anything away from other early Sonic physics experts like Christian Whitehead, Simon Tomley, or Damnesian, or even Lapper, who took Mercury's initial physics guide and expanded it greatly. But Mercury was the guy who first put pen to paper and documented the inner workings for everyone to use. Anyway, let's look at how the physics work and maybe discover what makes them so special. In classic Sonic games, movement is organized into 4 main floor modes, which tell the game engine whether Sonic is running on a floor, wall, or ceiling. These modes allow the game to adjust Sonic's ground speed and other forces based on Sonic's orientation to the ground. In floor mode, Sonic moves normally along a flat or sloped surface. The game applies friction, acceleration, deceleration, and a slope factor, all added to the current ground speed and converted through a bit of math to Cartesian coordinates, or X and Y coordinates, to give Sonic his next position on the ground. When airborne, gravity pushes Sonic until he contacts the floor using collision lines, which check for ground below Sonic and trigger a landing when a point collides with the floor. These collision lines position themselves in sync with the current ground mode, rotating based on the direction of the ground mode. In floor mode, when Sonic is walking normally, these collision lines point down to detect the ground below Sonic. When Sonic runs up the side of a loop, Sonic enters wall mode. Here the game rotates the ground detection lines, which can be thought of as raycasts, sideways to help Sonic stick to the wall.
In wall mode, ground detection will be to the left or right of Sonic dependent on if he's running up a wall to the right or to the left. When I code movement like this, I typically split up the left and right wall modes just to make it a bit easier to tell which wall Sonic is currently on, but I'm hardly an expert. Ceiling mode works similarly. When Sonic reaches the top of a loop, ground detection flips so that the lines or raycasts detect the ground above the player, since he is walking upside down. In ceiling or wall mode, Sonic must maintain a certain amount of speed to continue in this mode. If the speed reaches below a set threshold, we'll call it the fall threshold, Sonic falls. Or simply put, when Sonic can't maintain his speed on a wall or ceiling, he drops off the wall or ceiling and falls back to the floor. Shifting between these ground modes is how Sonic runs around loops. Running and walking are implemented through careful control of Sonic's acceleration and speed limits. Starting from a standstill, Sonic has a low acceleration, which makes him easy to control at low speeds. Once Sonic reaches a certain speed threshold, his acceleration increases, allowing him to reach top speed quickly. At top speed, Sonic can keep moving forward with very little friction slowing him down, allowing for long, fluid runs through the game's environments. This balance between controlled walking, smooth acceleration, and high-speed running is key to Sonic's signature gameplay feel. If the player presses the opposite direction, Sonic decelerates much quicker, which allows him to respond quickly to player inputs even at high speed.
During Sonic Adventure's development, there was a focus on giving Sonic an even wider Western appeal. Art director Kazuyuki Hoshino was influenced by urban street culture, because at the time, artists had been incorporating retro games into the urban street aesthetic. He felt that the urban art style would be fitting for Sonic, so Sega held an internal contest to determine Sonic's new design, and artist Yuji Uekawa won the competition. His design was inspired by other contest entries, even one from Sonic's original designer, Naoto Oshima, as well as the art styles of the late Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball fame, Susumu Matsuhita of Adventure Island fame, and various designs from Walt Disney and Looney Tunes. Additionally, Sonic's personality leaned more into his rebellious side. This was to separate him from so many Japanese mascots designed to look cute or immature, with Yuji Naka even citing that Hello Kitty had owned the cute market in Japan for a long time now. Tails was created as a cute counterpart to Sonic to appeal more to Japanese audiences, which at the time lacked the West's enthusiasm for the Sonic series. Tails' design took after Kitsune from Urusei Yatsura and Meow from the original Phantasy Star. And finally, the Sonic and Tails dynamic was inspired by Piccolo and Gohan from the Dragon Ball Z series. Special thanks to our current and first channel member, or Bounder, Spitfire, who will be the second Bounder and get their shout out. Sonic's friendly rival Knuckles the Echidna was first conceptualized as a reptilian creature inspired by the popularity of 1993's Jurassic Park. A remnant of that concept is preserved in Knuckles' long tail. During the Echidna phase of conceptualization, series veteran Yuji Naka pushed for Knuckles' color scheme to be purple, but the color red won out due to its overwhelming popularity in the States. I had to re-record this one a few times because it made me laugh, but according to a 2006 interview with character designer Takashi Yuda, it was revealed that the white crest on Knuckles' chest was supposed to complement a sponsorship with a shoe manufacturer, presumably Nike, but that never went through. This next Sonic influence is speculation, but a user from Sonic Retro going by the name of Expansive Love Stories points out that the dynamic between Sonic and Knuckles is similar to Conan and Jimsy from the 1978 anime Future Boy Conan, both involving a foreigner visiting a spiky red-haired native's island before a rivalry quickly forms between the two. Both rivalries also eventually turn into friendships. Similarly, Studio Ghibli's 1986 film Castle in the Sky involves a floating island kept afloat by a giant crystal, similarly to the Master Emerald's role in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Knuckles' regional differences from Sonic and Tails are realistic too. Consider that real-life hedgehogs and foxes are native to several overlapping or nearby continents, just as Sonic and Tails are from neighboring locales South Island and West Side Island respectively. Whereas echidnas are native to Australia and New Guinea, it would appear that Knuckles hailing from the Forgotten Angel Island with its own distinct culture serves as a meta-theme. In the Sonic & Knuckles official game book, Sega even went as far as to give Knuckles a Jamaican accent, often accentuated by his frequent use of the word "mon," which of course complements his shoes matching the Rastafarian flag's color scheme. That said, Angel Island, along with a few other zones, were also inspired by locations closer to Sega Technical Institute's location in California where Sonic 3 and Knuckles was made, with Angel Island being based on an island off the coast of San Francisco, which is also coincidentally called Angel Island, whereas Ice Cap Zone is simply inspired by snowboarding. According to a 2006 GameSpy interview with Takashi Yuta, the initial plan was for Knuckles to only act as a supporting character similarly to Amy from Sonic CD, but his popularity proved more than enough to justify not only putting his name on Sonic 3's follow-up, Sonic and Knuckles, but also becoming a playable character via lock-on technology for Sonic 2, while Sonic 3 gave him a more distinct campaign with its own story. Admittedly, this story is somewhat contradicted by the fact that Knuckles was already partially coded in the retail version of Sonic 3, but it's possible Yuta was speaking to his popularity internally before release. Going back to Sonic's original creation, Sonic's design was inspired by Mickey Mouse and Felix the Cat. The Blue Blur's original name was the more formal Mr. Hedgehog, but Sonic was later chosen for thematic consistency. Sonic's blue hue was originally teal before moving to a darker shade to both pop out from the backgrounds and to complement Sega's logo. According to series producer Yuji Naka, Sonic's color was also supposed to symbolize peace, trust, and coolness, complementing Sonic's philosophy, though finding a direct source on this claim is admittedly spotty. And Sonic's get-it-done personality was based on the then future president, Bill Clinton. Okay, I really never thought those words would come out of my mouth in that order like that. His boots, meanwhile, were inspired by Michael Jackson's boots on the Bad album cover, most notably the rounded point at the end and the side buckles, while Santa Claus inspired the color scheme. Sonic 1's US manual mentions Sonic's boots grant him speed, but this is not reflected anywhere else in canon, and as the Sonic Wiki Zone points out, was likely a misconception based on the speed boots granted by the power sneakers found in Sonic 1. The emphasis on speed created a focus on fast animals during Sonic 1's development. An early consideration was a rabbit that would throw objects with their ears. This rabbit design would return as DLC in Sonic Superstars. Another consideration was an armadillo, and while this wouldn't make the cut, the idea was later adapted into Mighty the Armadillo, as seen in games such as Sega Sonic the Hedgehog and Knuckles Chaotix. To no one's surprise, Sonic Team eventually settled on a hedgehog. Humorously, according to a 2009 Video Gamer interview with Yuji Naka, Sonic's inability to swim was based on the game designer's misconception that hedgehogs couldn't swim. Just think about that for a second. We wouldn't have that iconic, terrifying drowning theme if they had done their research. Sonic's personality archetype is inspired by the West's rebellious, dude with a tood culture of the 90s, with a heart of gold sentiment for balance. Leaning further into this Western appeal, originally Sonic was in a rock band and had a human girlfriend named Madonna, but Sega ended up leaving both these ideas on the cutting room floor. Like any hero, Sonic needed an arch nemesis, and Sonic Team repurposed art from one of the contest entries to serve as that archenemy. They combined the design with Humpty Dumpty, and the good Dr. Eggman was born. According to Mark Petronil's History of Sonic the Hedgehog, the association with speed came from Yuji Naka's dissatisfaction after porting Ghouls and Ghosts, which he felt was too slow. His motivation was also influenced by his childhood, where he was obsessed with speed, which would manifest in his Super Mario Bros. 1 sessions where he tried to beat World 1-1 as fast as he could. It's said that Sonic 1's project name was Defeat Mario, even going as far as making Sonic's default speed Mario's top speed, though, once again, sources on this are difficult to find. In an August 2003 Game Informer interview with game designer Hirokazu Yasuhara, he recalled Yuji Naka demonstrating an algorithm that displayed a ball smoothly rolling along a curve. Naka wanted this code to be used for the fast-paced platformer inspired by his aforementioned affinity for speed. According to Yasuhara, the most important aspect of Sonic was his, quote, dazzle. He believed that you have to give the gamer more, likening the target experience to visiting an amusement park. This philosophy influenced the combination of speed, level geometry, and general gameplay found in Sonic 1. Sonic 1's distinct geometry and focus on speed were carryovers from an earlier point in development where the game was called Twin Stars. However, due to creative disagreements on Sonic 1's speed, the game was slowed down. And this is just speculation, but it's been noted that Sonic 1's level design shifts its emphasis from speed to platforming in most zones following Green Hill, which may reflect said disagreement. This could also explain the playground-esque level design of Sonic CD, a game that takes after Sonic 1's platforming focus. Of course, those in favor of a faster-paced experience won out since the speed cap was raised in Sonic 2 and even more so in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, with the aforementioned games also having a majority of levels that greatly favored speed. Sonic 1's art style took inspiration from the CGI at the time, demonstrated by how much certain assets pop out, as well as the checkerboard patterns being a popular aesthetic choice of CGI projects. This aesthetic was shown firsthand with Green Hill, which was also influenced by California California's geography. Sonic 3 and Knuckles would expand upon the CGI art style by emphasizing texture and lighting, as well as the aesthetic of Sonic 3's special stage, the aesthetic of the slot machine minigame, and of course the title sequences of Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles respectively. This focus on emulating CGI elements would hit its apex with Sonic 3D Blast, with almost all of its artwork taking the form of digitized CGI. That being said, when working on the box art for Sonic 1, illustrator Akira Watanabe said he was instructed to make the package design similar to pop art. The original Sonic the Hedgehog's logo was inspired by a pilot wing emblem. Developer Naoto Oshima made a story about a pilot with spiky hair who earned the nickname Hedgehog. This pilot would fly a plane donning Sonic's likeness and would later marry a fictional author that wrote children's books, with one of her stories being Sonic 1. Many songs during the classic era of Sonic took inspiration from 90s pop, R&B, and New Jack Swing. While Sonic 1 and 2 dipped in and out of this, Sonic 3 doubled down by onboarding Brad Buxer, a keyboardist and composer who had collaborated with the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson. Many songs either sampled Jackson's voice or took inspiration from the sound of the singer's music, notably his 1991 album Dangerous, with songs like Carnival Nights Act 1 and 2 themes sounding similar to Michael Jackson's Jam. The focus on this distinct early 90s sound would not be lost on the games to follow Sonic 3, with titles beyond the decade such as Sonic Mania and Sonic Superstars still carrying this torch 20 years later.
As a longtime member of the Sonic fan game community and creator of Sonic Time Twisted, I, myself, Overbound, have seen firsthand how fan games have evolved over the years. What started out as small experimental games by kids with basic tools has grown into a thriving scene with movement engines that rival the official Sonic games. Here I want to give you an overview of the tech involved in developing these early Sonic fan games and how that early tech evolved. Some of the earliest Sonic fan games were built on ClickTeam's Click and Play, very limited piece of software for making small games and applications on Windows 95 and 98. This engine lacked even basic features like scrolling, so most of the games built on Click and Play were largely screen-by-screen games. Some of the Click and Play games I remember are Sonic Boom and Sonic Roboblast. Eventually, the community moved on to newer ClickTeam products, mainly the Games Factory and Multimedia Fusion, which introduced scrolling, making fan games feel a little bit more like the official Sonic games. The ClickTeam software development tools had built-in 2D movement that many early games took advantage of. But it was deeply flawed, with characters getting stuck on floors, walls, and ceilings, as well as lacking any slope movement. It didn't even have a variable jump to allow the players to press longer on the jump button for a higher jump. You always jump your maximum height. Pretty lame. I should note that not every fan game was made in ClickTeam products. Just the majority of them. There were outliers like fan games made in the early 90s outside of the fan gaming scene, and games like Sonic Metrics, Retro Sonic, and Sonic Robo Blast 2. After struggling with ClickTeam's built-in movement, the community started developing what they called static engines, or custom movement inside of ClickTeam products. Custom developed movement was often smoother, allowing for momentum-based movement, better controls, variable jump height, and less getting stuck in walls and ceilings. Though they still lacked things like loops and half pipes in most cases, and even when they did have those things, they didn't work great. At the same time as static movement was taking off in Multimedia Fusion, GameMaker was rising in popularity. Unlike ClickTeam tools, which relied on drag-and-drop mechanics, GameMaker offered a scripting language that gave developers full control over movement and physics. Once static engines and GameMaker had entered the scene, the next big step was getting Sonic's movement to feel right when going around loops or up slopes. Enter Damnesian, who would develop 360 platforming movement for both GameMaker and Multimedia Fusion. Damnesian's work led to two of the most important Sonic fan game engines. Sonic Worlds for Multimedia Fusion, which became the go-to engine for ClickTeam-based Sonic games, and the Xmas engine, also released as Sonic Dash, for GameMaker, which gave GameMaker developers a Sonic World equivalent to build Sonic games on top of. At one point I even used the Xmas engine for Sonic Time Twisted, but not in the full game. Once these engines were released, the Sonic fan game scene changed forever. Instead of spending months coding movement, developers could now focus on making levels, art, and new gameplay ideas. While these early 360 movement engines didn't have physics that were exactly like the classic Sonic games, they were close enough to be mighty impressive. As discussed in other videos, Mercury Silver would eventually create the physics guide, and bigger and better engines like Unity, Unreal, and Godot would come into the picture. But that's a story for another day. If there was ever any doubt in your mind that Sonic Rush is basically Sonic Advance 4, this should put that to rest. In the 2005 E3 build of Sonic Rush, which was dumped and released by Drix or DRX at the Hidden Palace Zone, and who we previously mentioned in our Knuckles Chaotix definitive development history video, because he also made a bunch of discoveries related to Chaotix, and you should check that video out. Anyway, in this E3 build with some hacking, you can actually play Sonic Rush with Sonic Advance 3's Sonic sprite, in place of Sonic's normal polygonal model, which was used in the final game and used in the demo if you didn't hack it. The hack was created by Mo, who might be one of the Three Stooges. I really didn't think they were into Sonic hacking, but maybe. But that's not all. There's concept art from Sonic Rush with a more classic looking Sonic, suggesting even back then they were thinking of reverting or at least adapting some of Sonic's classic design into his modern design. We were also treated to a prototype design for Blaze the Cat, clearly going for a black cat look, and she looks a little bit witchy too, which makes sense since witches are always seen with black cats. To be honest, I kinda like this design better than her final one. Don't get me wrong, it needs work, but another area of color could fix that and give the character more definition and dimension. Overall, I like the direction of her character design better here than her final purple design. A black cat with some orange accents could have worked really well in Sonic's universe.
Did Sonic Colors use the Hedgehog engine? Well, according to a Twitter thread by user Sejider78, sorry if I mispronounced that, the answer is yes. Sonic Colors used the Hedgehog engine, and this is proven by examining the libraries that make up the engine. Libraries in the Hedgehog engine are groups of related code functionalities that get integrated into custom game code to form a video game, using the Hedgehog engine no less. Some of the Hedgehog engine libraries include Universe, which handles actions and gameplay scripting, Mirage, a library for drawing graphics, Sparkle, a library for particle effects, and the Database library used for accessing file systems, presumably for things like loading 3D models, textures, sounds, and other components that make up a game. Not every version of the Hedgehog engine uses the exact same libraries, as the engine has evolved over the years. For instance, according to Sajid, the Hedgehog engine was undergoing a code refactor, or code reorganization for all the non-coders out there, during the development of Sonic Colors. We even have some official Sonic Team documentation for the Hedgehog engine thanks to Twitter user Senor Dane, who responded to Sajid's thread with an official slide from Sonic Team that directly references the Universe library. The thread also mentions that Sonic Unleashed on the Wii and the two Sonic Storybook games do not use the Hedgehog engine, which makes sense. Two of those games were likely in development during Sonic Unleashed's production and the early days of the Hedgehog engine itself, while the other was released before the engine even existed. So yes, Sonic Colors did use the Hedgehog engine. This stands in stark contrast to what many people believed back in 2010. Information was scarce at the time, and due to the Wii's limited hardware capabilities, many assumed the engine wasn't used. But thanks to Sajid, we now know the truth. Sonic Colors used the Hedgehog engine, though not to the full extent it was used in Sonic Unleashed due to the Wii's hardware limitations.
While in development, Sonic Chaos was known as Sonic the Hedgehog 3, before being renamed Sonic and Tails in Japan and Sonic Chaos everywhere else. It's unknown why they didn't stick with the Sonic 3 name, however we can speculate that since the game came out well before the Genesis version of Sonic 3, Sega wanted to save that name for the Genesis project. Like Sonic 2's 8-bit version, the game was developed by Aspect, taking over from Ancient, who developed the first Sonic 8-bit outing, and by this time was deep into the development of the Streets of Rage series. There's a pre-release version of Sonic Chaos's box art available on the Sonic Retro Wiki. It shows Sonic and Tails holding hands as they run towards the viewer. The art perfectly fits with the North American box art for Sonic 1 through 3, which makes us believe it was probably drawn by Greg Martin, the legendary artist who did the American covers for Sonic 1 through 3. Though to my knowledge, there is no definitive proof he did this piece. But let's be real, it was probably him. I mean, he did do the final cover. Greg for sure did this art. It's of Sonic soaring through the clouds with his rocket boots while Tails watches, and Robotnik sneers with a Chaos Emerald. There's quite a lot of official, classically styled Sonic art for both the Japanese and American releases of Sonic Chaos, and this art doesn't get the attention of the art from the mainline series, so sadly, it isn't as well preserved. A side effect of Yuji Naka and Hirokazu Yasuhara coming to America to work on Sonic 2 and 3 is that you have this split in the series, whereby we have several developers in Japan who worked on a few games in the series for the Master System and Game Gear, as well as the games Sonic CD and Knuckles Chaotix. And these developers added their own reoccurring touches to the series, such as Toot Toot Sonic Warrior being shared between Sonic 2 8-bit, Sonic CD, and Sonic Chaos itself. A version of Metallic Madness music is also shared between all three games. There are also certain shared graphics and an art style between Sonic CD and Knuckles Chaotix, and of course the inclusion of the Super Peel Out here in Sonic Chaos, though it was never adopted in the mainline series, which was developed in America. In fact, the creator of Metal Sonic, Kazuki Hoshino, serves as the creative director of Sonic Team today. And his credits include art on both Sonic CD and Knuckles Chaotix, explaining the similar art assets in addition to Metal Sonic being in both games. Sonic Chaos was also recreated as a fan game mimicking the art style of Sonic Mania. It was created partially by YouTuber A+ Start, or Andy Collins, who is best known for the Son of a Glitch series here on YouTube. Development got as far as a demo of Turquoise Hill Zone, which was well received. Unfortunately, development of the game seems to have fallen off. Sonic Triple Trouble introduces a new antagonist to the series, Knack the Weasel, or Fang the Sniper in Japan. Knack was designed by Shinichi Higashi, also known as Tuma, a well-known character artist in Japan that worked for Sega at the time. The name Jet was considered for Knack. The design of his nose almost looks like the front of a jet if you squint real hard. That's probably where the name came from. Ultimately, the name Jet would be given to a Sonic Riders character named Jet the Hawk. Interesting to note that Higashi also designed a popular line of vinyl figures, several of which sport a similar design to Fang. Check out this magazine scan of the Great Turquoise Zone, showing an unused cutscene. Knack sees Sonic and pulls a gun on him, a pretty realistic looking pistol at that. I suppose the reason this didn't make it into the final game speaks for itself, although that wouldn't stop Sega all those years later in 2005. Here's an early screenshot of the 3D special stages, minus the plane, which hadn't been implemented yet. Judging from this screenshot, earlier in development, the snowboard from Robotnik Winter was supposed to be used as a surfboard in Great Turquoise Zone. Check out these two screenshots of a prototype peel-out animation, which has a yellow trail behind it. Sonic Triple Trouble has a bunch of promotional art for it too. There's this unused cover by Greg Martin. Check out this art of Sonic and Tails sitting down. This promotional calendar was released for the game in Japan, sporting its Japanese title, Sonic and Tails 2. Speaking of which, Sonic Triple Trouble at one point was going to be called Sonic Chaos 2, at least here in the West. Okay, here's a weird one. And to be clear, I didn't check the manual myself, but it does seem to be an accepted fact online that the Brazilian manual for Sonic Triple Trouble mentions that Knuckles is on vacation, and the character in the game that looks like Knuckles is actually his younger brother, Crucules, or Cruckles? I'm not really sure. Upon finding this out, I googled it, and apparently there's quite a few Sonic fans making designs and stories for this character, which by some stretch could be considered an official Sonic character. I don't know why the manual writer decided to make this change. The only possible reason I can come up with that isn't entirely out there is that Sonic Triple Trouble was released between Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles. Maybe they wanted the canon to line up better, since by release schedules, Sonic Triple Trouble would take place between the two Genesis outings, although I admit that's a stretch. In spite of no official Master System port, in 2009 a port of Triple Trouble was made to the Master System. The port was made by a hacking scene member, Glitch. While the conversion to the Master System does mean the game can make use of fewer colors, the larger resolution and ability to play on TV make this a fair trade-off. The zone Robotnik Winter marks one of the few times the Robotnik name was used in Japan for Dr. Eggman, though he's still called Dr. Eggman in the manual. So from the perspective of a Japanese player, they would not know the name Robotnik referenced the Eggman. For Sega's Consumer Electronics Show in 1994, Sega hired Lou Rawls, who was a a soul singer, best known for his 1976 hit You'll Never Find Another Love Like Mine. They hired him to host the promotional video they would hand out to potential buyers. The video is a pretty surreal look at 90s Sega culture mixed with Lou Rawls for some reason, but watching him feign enthusiasm for Sonic Triple Trouble while sounding like he's reading a 3rd grade book report, probably kind of like me actually, makes it all worth it. As with Sonic Chaos, there is a fan game for Sonic Triple Trouble, created by sometimes voice of the channel, Noah Copeland. The best part is, unlike Sonic Chaos's fan game outing, this one's actually finished and ready to play for Windows and Android. The reimagining is among the best fan game projects out there, and well worth a playthrough. On a personal note, Meta Junglerilla is actually called Meta Jungle. In a case of a reverse Mandela effect, y'all have been brainwashed into thinking it was Meta Junglerilla. But it was never Meta Junglerilla. It was Meta Jungle. It was always Meta Jungle. I remember it being Meta Jungle. My theory is when Noah Copeland decided to recreate Sonic Triple Trouble instead of G-Sonic, he split the timeline in two, and the consequences of that decision rippled forwards and backwards in time. I'm the only one that remembers the truth.
Sonic Adventure began its development on the struggling Sega Saturn. And while not much is known about this point of development, there is a few nuggets of information. Firstly, Sonic Adventure Saturn, which will be referred to as SA Saturn from this point on, had a very short development lifespan. Sega enthusiasts are well aware at this point that the Sega Saturn bombed in the market and wasn't gonna last much longer. Not wanting their next flagship title to make its debut on a sinking ship, SA Saturn's development team made the jump to the Sega Dreamcast. The work done on SA Saturn would be repurposed into Sonic World, a counterpart segment to the compilation of Sonic 1 through 3 and Knuckles found on Sonic Jam. While Sonic World served as a Sonic museum of sorts, its actual purpose was to serve as a tech demo for platforming in a 3D space. Getting back to Sonic Adventure, the most that is known of SA Saturn are these screenshots shown at the Sonic Adventure musical experience, and concept art shared by designer Satoshi Okano, notably the one depicting a spider character, which can be seen on posters in Speed Highway. During development of Sonic Adventure, several characters underwent design tweaks. Most notable among these were newcomers E102 Gamma and Big the Cat. In Big the Cat's case, his earlier designs follow a silhouette similar to his final appearance, though there seems to have been a notable focus on exaggeration. Some are relatively minimalist, like Big having no articles of clothing, save for sandals, while others show him bearing fangs or towering over Sonic even more than he already does in the final game. In the case of the unusually large Big, strange sentence we know, it appears that his design leaned more on Totoro from Hayao Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro. For E102 Gamma, his design tweaks were more drastic. While his theme as a gun-wielding robot remained intact, Gamma would otherwise undergo complete changes to his entire body shape. One depicts him with a triangular body and a top hat-like head, with the overall aesthetic of the body closely resembling Dr. Eggman's original outfit. Another shows him having a circular body, a hood-like cover, topping a belt-like structure, topped off with him dual-wielding machine guns. From this point on, the structures resembling a belt would stay, while the hood seems to have been redesigned as a visor. The next design boasts a body shape resembling a tombstone while returning to the single machine gun, while the next design boasts a rounder shape. The final design has clearly taken after the first three and gave Gamma a more threatening stature.
Naoto Oshima, the co-creator and original designer of Sonic the Hedgehog, frequently interacts with fans on Twitter, and some of his tweets include some fun and insightful facts into Sonic and his development. On one such occasion, user Sonic Rush 2005 asked, "Does Sonic have a mom, mother, and dad, father in the game universe?" To which Oshima simply responded, "No." A long-standing fan debate was addressed when Devin 101 Zone asked whether the white parts of Sonic's shoes were socks or a part of his shoes. Oshima responded that they were part of the shoes. This begs the obvious and important question: does Sonic wear socks at all? Or are his hog dogs running wild and free inside those shoe holes? In one tweet, Oshima reflected on his final project at Sonic Team. My last job at Sonic Team, storyboarded and edited in Premiere. Effects done in Photoshop. So Oshima was behind the CGI intro for Sonic Adventure. Cool. Ava the Arctic Fox followed up and asked if there were any parts of the intro that were cut, to which Oshima responded that he did not waste a single shot of footage the movie team created. Another user, Audrey Win GB, asked Oshima for the artist who created this concept art for Sonic CD, betting it was likely Yasushi Yamaguchi. Oshima agreed, stating that Yamaguchi's Sonic always has a downward nose. Oshima also recently retweeted 2 pieces of Sonic fan art, showing variations in Sonic's design. This first one is by GamerTime Ants, and this one is by Tyler J. McGrath. I don't want to speak for Oshima out of turn, but since he retweeted this fan art, I'm guessing he liked the designs.
Polish Game Dev Summit Digital Dragons, Twitter user and game developer Brandon Sheffield of Necrosoft Games sat in on a presentation by Hirokazu Yasuhara. As the game planner for many of the early entries of the Sonic the Hedgehog series, Yasuhara has quite a bit of insider knowledge about the series' development. Luckily for us, that's exactly what he shared on that day. Get ready for some Sonic 2 development revelations in Lost in Time, the scrapped time travel of Sonic 2. Game Facts Special. Hirokazu Yasuhara's presentation was a bombshell. Drawings, diagrams, and notes were shared that revealed Sonic 2 had a particularly interesting feature early on in development: time travel. Sonic 2 was originally intended to take place across 5 time periods. There had been some speculation about time travel being part of Sonic 2's development for many years, mostly due to some zones that look eerily similar to each other, as well as the presence of dinosaur-like enemies in promotional material and the final game. You can see the Reds Badnik in this Spanish promotional VHS from before the game's release, and the Stegos in this early mock-up image that accompanied the game's initial announcement. There was also this explicit mention of an adventure that spanned different time periods in a scan of the Japanese Sega magazine, Mega World Volume 6. However, Yasuhara's presentation solidified the fan theory as fact, and he brought the evidence to back it up. Fixing a damaged future. According to the information Yasuhara provided, Sonic 2's time travel would have worked like this. Sonic chases down Eggman in a handful of zones in the present time. In order to escape and continue with his dark deeds, Eggman jumps in a time machine and goes to the past, labeled as medieval time in the slide Yasuhara presented. Sonic then follows Eggman into the past through the use of some kind of warp point, but the actual mechanics of how that would work were not explained. After Eggman causes some trouble in the past, he and Sonic travel back to the present, which has been damaged by their actions. Sonic then travels even further back to an ancient time through the use of a hidden shrine, changes the future once more, and then returns to the future for a climactic final battle in space. Yasuhara also provided development sketches that show how the game's West Side Island location would change from the effects of each jump through time, along with the names and locations of the levels on the island. Here's a breakdown of each time period. Now, or present time, contains Green Hill Zone, Wood Zone, Sand Shower Zone, Metropolis Zone, and Ocean Wind Zone. Future contains Chemical Plant Zone, Casino Night Zone, Genocide City 1 Zone, and Genocide City 2 Zone. Now 2, or Ruined Present, contains Dust Hill Zone, Rock World Zone, and Oil Ocean Zone. Ancient contains Hilltop Zone, Blue Lake Zone, Rock World Zone, Tropical Plant Zone, and Olympus. There's also a 5th time period slide that illustrates the game after it's been struck by a tsunami. Apparently, that damaging wave would have fractured and separated large chunks of the island while transforming Tropical Plant Zone into Tropical Summer Zone. Hilltop Zone and Blue Lake Zone remain in this diagram, while the other zones have been seemingly washed away. Additionally, there was the medieval time outlined in the story diagram, but it was unfortunately not part of the zone diagrams that were provided. Because of the vague brick textures and sconces present in the Madness Mountain concept art, it is believed that this could have been part of the medieval time period. There was also a Sonic 2 manga released in Japan to coincide with Sonic 2's release. What was probably very strange for readers at the time was that much of the manga took place in prehistoric times, dealing with the origins of Sonic and Eggman, where a normal hedgehog gets turned to stone and then comes out of the stones and is granted super speed to become Sonic, or something like that. I don't read Japanese. Anyway, the manga ends with a story set in the Middle Ages. Both story settings seem to come from the early Sonic 2 designs, though it's doubtful the designs influenced the actual stories told in the manga. Even the American cartoon Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, which was in development at the same time as Sonic 2, had a time travel storyline over 4 episodes called The Quest for the Chaos Emeralds. And in these 4 episodes, Sonic travels to both prehistoric and medieval time periods. Could this cartoon's storyline trace its origins back to Sonic 2's development? Tails did turn out more brown in the cartoons, thanks to the TV series producers being sent early Tails sprites as reference. So maybe other things carried over too? Then again, time traveling to prehistoric and medieval times aren't exactly original concepts for fiction. So it could be a coincidence. From the information provided, you can tell that the implementation of time travel at that early point in Sonic 2's development was not intended to be a game mechanic, but rather a method of contextualizing the game's story. Still, it's mind-blowing to think that going by their positions on these development maps, at one point, Chemical Plant Zone, Emerald Hill Zone, Dust Hill Zone, and Hilltop Zone were essentially versions of the same zone. While Hikaru Yasuhara and Yuji Naka had been lured away by Sega of America by the likes of Mark Cerny, the third pillar of Sonic 1's development, Naoto Ohishima, stayed behind and began working on Sonic CD, which had its own version of time travel. It had been speculated by fans for many years that Sonic CD and Sonic 2 were initially intended to be the same game, with the Japanese team working on a Mega CD port. However, we got our answer in a 2009 interview Mr. Oshima did with Gama Sutra when he was asked to contrast the two projects and their design philosophies. Oshima said, Sonic CD was made in Japan, while Sonic 2 was made by Yuji Naka's team over in the US. We exchanged information, of course, talking about the sort of game design each of us was aiming for. But Sonic CD wasn't Sonic 2. It was really meant to be more of a CD version of the original Sonic. I can't help but wonder, therefore, if we had more fun making CD than they did making Sonic 2, because we didn't have the pressure of making a numbered sequel. How things changed. Looking at those diagrams, it's very interesting to see how the effects of Eggman's actions are represented through the zone changes, most notably between now and Now 2. While the landscape has been changed to become more damaged and fractured, you can still tell that Green Hill Zone becomes Dust Hill Zone, and Ocean Wind Zone becomes Oil Ocean Zone. Even more interesting is the fact that there is no ruined version of Wood Zone in Now 2. Well, at least from what we can tell with these images. The cutting room floor speculates that Wood Zone was conceived as the past version of Metropolis Zone, and this has been a thought by fans for many years. However, overlaying the islands from the different time periods shows that Woodland Zone takes place in the same location as Casino Night Zone. Other zones did end up making it to the final game, although their order and names changed over the course of development. For instance, Green Hill Zone was changed to Emerald Hill Zone, so as not to reuse the title of a zone from Sonic 1. Olympus possibly became Aquatic Ruin Zone, and Rock World Zone is believed to be Mystic Cave Zone in the finished game. Then, of course, there is Genocide City. That zone's name wouldn't have made it into the game for obvious reasons, but thankfully, the unsettling title came as the result of the language barrier. According to zone artist Tom Payne, the Japanese devs wanted a name that was edgy for that zone, and ended up going a little overboard. Its name was later changed to Cyber City, before the entire zone was scrapped, with part of it being used for Metropolis Zone Act 3. Another tidbit from that interview with Tom Payne is that he vaguely remembered the time travel concept from early in development and confirmed its existence. Curiously, while these concepts and diagrams are likely from a very early point in Sonic 2's development, before any significant work had been done, the ideas and designs for many of the zones from this period persisted up to the game's release. Just take a look at Hilltop Zone. It's the 5th zone of the finished game, but it contains many of the same visual elements as Emerald Hill Zone, along with things like lava pits and dinosaur-like enemies, the zones that were left behind. Thankfully, we have some additional visuals to accompany the diagrams that give us a better idea of what these cut zones would have looked like. Concept art that can be found in Sonic the Hedgehog 25th Anniversary Art Book reveals that the scrapped zones Tropical Sun, believed to be the analog of Tropical Plant Zone in the ancient time period, and Ocean Wind, a present time period zone, would have been very similar visually. There is also the question of the Hidden Palace Zone, which, despite being revealed in the promotional material mentioned earlier, was cut just days before development wrapped, according to level artist Craig Stead. That zone, which has since been brought to life by the 2013 remaster of Sonic 2, as well as Sonic Origins, also contained the robo-dinosaur enemies known as Reds. Could this have been an example of an ancient time zone? Or maybe Hidden Palace Zone contains the ancient shrine used for time travel? We'll never know now, but the decision to cut the level so close to completion, meaning the zone itself was likely already finished or close to it, is definitely cause for some speculation. As for the future's epic final battle in outer space, it seems like it was envisioned as an expanded version of the Death Egg final zone in the finished game. This concept art shows Sonic running on what is probably the outside of Robotnik's Death Egg, with a planet and the inky blackness of space visible in the background. We would also see the Death Egg fully realized as a complete zone in the follow-up Sonic & Knuckles, which, along with Sonic 3, reused a lot of the concept art from Sonic 2. There was no solid proof of these cut zones' existence until the 25th Anniversary Art Book was released, which happened to almost coincide with Yasuharu's presentation. But now, we have some excellent points of reference for the alternate zones across time periods. The things that could have been. Although Sonic 2's time travel concept was cut very early into the game's development, the evidence that has surfaced has given us a fascinating peek behind the curtain of this franchise-defining title. With the information shared by Hikaru Yasuhara, decades worth of fan theories and speculation was validated. That kind of mass info dump doesn't happen very often, especially for globally recognized franchises like Sonic. Sonic CD ended up being the first Sonic game to dabble with time manipulation, but it wasn't the last. The dreaded Sonic the Hedgehog from 2006, as well as Sonic Generations and Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric all use time travel in their narratives. Time travel is even used in the Sonic fan game Sonic Time Twisted, which was created by the owner of GameFAQs Special, Overbound, and older fan games like Sonic SV2 Time Travel and Sonic Time Attacked. What do you think? Should future Sonic games feature time travel too?
Possibly the most interesting aspect about the 8-bit version of Sonic 1 is that it shares so many similarities with its 16-bit counterpart. Unlike its successor Sonic 2, it shares half of its 6 zones with its bigger home console sibling, and as we'll learn, may once have been even more. The presence of Marble Zone's background music was discovered by Retro Tech member Croc in November 2013. Nestled in the ROM of the Master System version of the game at hex offset 0CB0A, let's give it a listen. If you didn't know, the music for Sonic 1 8-bit was created by Yuzo Koshiro, the man behind the soundtrack for the legendary Streets of Rage. Koshiro and his family ran a game studio called Ancient. They developed the 8-bit version of Sonic 1. The music is part of mounting evidence that Marble Zone was once meant for inclusion in game.
graphics for the Badnik Batbrain were also found. Furthermore, in the original Master System game, the initial palette for Bridge Zone, which never shows up during normal play because it's overridden by a cycling palette, is slightly different, with one color of green being replaced with lavender. Could this be a leftover palette from Marble Zone? The cutting room floor also lists these pillars for Labyrinth Zone. They have no equivalent in the 16th version of the game, at least not in Labyrinth Zone. As you may know, 16th Marble Zone is home to similar pillars, and it's not unreasonable to speculate that these pillars may have made it into both Labyrinth and Marble Zone had the 8-bit version of the game had both zones. Additionally, if you look closely at the background for Bridge Zone, you will see it uses a similar style of trees and mountains to that of Marble Zone. It's also the second zone in the game, just like Marble Zone. In 2016, Yuzo shared a few development documents for Sonic 1, showcasing the original line art for South Island as well as layouts for Jungle, Bridge, and Green Hill Zone. There exists concept art for a final boss fight that never made it into the 16-bit version of Sonic 1, or the 8-bit version for that matter, but these unused tiles for Sky Base Zone look like they were intended for that boss fight. In fact, the concept art looks a little bit like Sky Base Zone itself, and of course it's something we would revisit in the form of Flying Battery Zone and Wing Fortress Zone. Robotnik even hops in an airplane to escape his inevitable loss. It makes me wonder if Skybase or a variant of it was planned for Sonic 1 16-bit. It's pretty cool that potentially Sonic Team had the idea for a Wing Fortress Zone even back then. Another theory some fans hold is that Sky Base Zone actually evolved from the 8-bit version of Starlight Zone. Since Sonic 2 8-bit was released a month before the main Genesis version, it actually holds the distinction of being the first game that released with both Tails and a robotic version of Sonic, Mecha Sonic to be specific. It is also the first game in the series to have a final level, Crystal Egg, that only appears upon getting the 6 Chaos Emeralds. Yes, this game only has 6 Chaos Emeralds. There are some pretty interesting graphics from Sonic 2 8-bit. Check out this sprite of Tails crying. Tails actually has a pretty complete tile set for a non-playable character, leading some to believe he was intended as a playable character but cut for time purposes. If it were true, I'd match up with its 16-bit counterpart, that much better. This monitor can be found in the game. It's a continue monitor, the only occurrence of such a monitor in any Sonic game that I'm aware of. The thing is though, the actual graphic is obscured in game, so while you can smash the monitor and get the continue, you never actually see the monitor sprite shown. There are also monitors with a question mark icon, which may have been intended to deliver a random power-up and a gray sneaker, which if I had to guess, would have made the player slower. There are also these scans, which show a different floor in Aqua Lake Zone. This unused water slope was fully implemented, allowing Sonic to slide down it as he does in Labyrinth Zone from Sonic 1. Speaking of Aqua Lake Zone, anyone remember that Sonic fan game, Sonic Nexus, which basically remade Aqua Lake Zone in an early version of Sonic Worlds? That was way back in 2007, which is still over a decade after the level first appeared in Sonic 2. Sky High Zone received some pretty significant graphical changes during its development. These pre-release screenshots show the zone sporting a look more akin to Green Hill Zone than that of the 16-bit Emerald Hill Zone with its more beveled checker patterns, which we would see in the final game. Likewise, Green Hill Zone, with an S, went through a similar transformation, sporting the same checker pattern, different trees, and check out that pig. In 2014, a prototype build of Sonic 2 8-bit was released, called the Sonic 2 Auto Demo because the demo plays itself. It shows off the prototype Green Hill Zone as seen in magazine scans, as well as portions of Sky High and Underground Zone. The demo was hacked to create a playable version which you can download on the Sonic Retro Wiki. The hacked version showcases some fairly broken physics, especially for loops. This would be the first time loops appeared in an 8-bit Sonic game, having been completely absent from Sonic 1. From January 1991 to June 1993, Sega released a series of promotional VHS tapes in Japan known as the Sega Shinsaku Soft Video Series. In the 23rd volume, there is early promotional footage from Sonic 2. It shows off an early version of Sky High with the checkerboard pattern. The level in this version of the game is also called Sky High Zo, spelled like the greeting, H-I instead of H-I-G-H. Aqua Lake still has differences too, sporting its checkerboard pattern as Sky High does. Sonic 2 8-bit does have a few unique pieces of promotional art to go along with the release of the game, including one of Tails being tied as he is in the game. There's also artwork for Dr. Robotnik and Mecha Samus. The western cover for Sonic 2 features Bird and Bee Badniks. Hold up, birds and bees? And they don't even appear in the game. Somebody's heading to horny jail. It's unknown if these were ever planned or just made up for the box art.
Cool Jerk from Sonic Retro has some pretty interesting points about Sonic 2 that he made in a post back in 2014. He poses several questions. Why isn't Green Hill Zone the first level in the game? Why is Toot Toot Sonic Warrior used as music? Why are there no speed shoes in the game? Why no special stages? Is it possible that the reason Sonic 2 8-bit is so difficult and different than the rest of the series is because it was incomplete at the time of release? There is an Easter egg in Sky High Zone which causes some hidden birds to appear. When the player jumps to the left of the 1-up monitor at the top of Sky High Zone Act 1, the birds will appear.
We found 13 more canceled Sonic games! That's on top of the 20 from Part 1! These canceled games would have been on consoles, ranging from Nintendo DS, Xbox 360, to modern consoles and mobile phones. Find out about all of them in Every Canceled Sonic Game Part 2. Game Facts Special: Sonic the Hedgehog 4, Episode 3. Sonic the Hedgehog 4 started out with humble beginnings. Originally intended to be a small, classic-styled spin-off title for mobiles, Sega saw the potential for bringing back the retro side-scrolling gameplay from the Genesis trilogy. It was decided that this would become the next mainline entry into the Sonic series, releasing on multiple platforms. The first two in this trilogy had generally mixed critical reviews, and a lot of unsatisfied fans who felt the game was a bland rehash. This reflected in sales which were not meeting Sega's expectations, with an evident decline between the first and second episode. This led to the cancellation of the planned Episode 3. Intended for release in 2014, Sonic brand manager Ken Baloff was noted in Sonic forums, saying that Sonic 4 was going to be a trilogy, but couldn't disclose why Episode 3 was cancelled. Christian Whitehead, using his online alias, The Taxman, said in the same thread that he was briefly asked to work on Episode 3, but that fell through as Sega Studios of Australia closed down. Not all was lost for Whitehead though, as he would go on to create the next successful foray into classic gameplay with Sonic Mania. It would eventually come to be known as the true successor to the Genesis Sonic games, along with Sonic Superstars, while Sonic 4 fell by the wayside. Sonic Mania 2. The staggering success of Sonic Mania left many fans assuming that a sequel would be on the way. However, that never happened. It was later revealed that talks did take place between Mania developers and Sega. Both mutually agreed to head in different directions. Christian Whitehead's studio, Evening Star, expressed their desire to work on their own intellectual property in meetings, while Sega expressed interest in updating the classic pixel art style of Sonic to something more modern. As Sega had found during R&D sessions that the pixel art style of Mania was only servicing a very specific core fanbase. Some rumors surfaced that communication breakdowns occurred with Sega and Christian Whitehead and the Mania team, but these were never confirmed and eventually dismissed. Christian had always made it clear that his studio would move into the 3D game sphere eventually. The Taxman even spoke about how they helped Sega in the planning stage of developing a new Sonic side-scroller, going as far as creating a prototype for a 2.5D Sonic game. After Mania, Whitehead and many other Mania developers would organize into Evening Star Games, and their next game will be their own IP, Penny's Big Breakaway, releasing in 2024, and Sega's next classic Sonic project released as Sonic Superstars this October, in collaboration with Arzest Studio, which was founded by Sonic's creator Naoto Oshima, pre-1993 Sonic arcade games. Al Nilsson was the group director of global marketing at Sega, and was responsible for the studio's re-entry into the US games market with the Genesis. He held this position from 1989 to 1993. Just before he exited, he gave a small tidbit of information to the May edition of Electronic Gaming Monthly. He spoke about 2 Sonic arcade games that had never been released, primarily because executives didn't think it lived up to, or sufficiently represented, Sonic the Hedgehog's reputation at the time. Al alludes to a project being in development at the time of writing too. This was speculated to be Sega Sonic the Hedgehog. which was built solely for Sega's arcade hardware at the time, the Sega System 32. As for the two cancelled games Nilsson mentions, they could be in reference to Waku Waku Sonic, Patrol Car, and Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter Galaxy Patrol, which never had Western releases, or potentially the 1992 arcade/puzzle title Sega Sonic Bros, which we highlighted in the previous Sonic cancelled game episode. Super Sonic, Electronic Gaming Magazine report. In May 1996, Electronic Gaming Magazine claimed to have seen assets for a Sonic game in development, which they said were not from the upcoming Sonic fighting game, which we'll talk about shortly. A scan from the magazine reported that it would be a side-scrolling action game with 3D models. However, fans pointed out that the model they displayed in the magazine was likely the one used for Sonic's appearance in Sega's Fighting Vipers. Details are fuzzy, and could be attributed to Sonic Extreme's long list of working titles. Sonic Triple Trouble, Master System port. Triple Trouble had initially released on Sega's Game Gear handheld in 1994 by the studio Aspect. The Game Gear's version of Triple Trouble was set to be ported to Sega's Master System console, just as the previous entry in the series, Sonic Chaos, had been. The Master System's market was strongest in Europe and Brazil, with sales targets falling behind expectations, with just 2 million in the United States. Perhaps the dwindling excitement for Sega's Master System was the reason for the port's cancellation, but no reasons have ever been confirmed publicly. The game has never been officially mentioned again since the confirmation of its release date in issue 24 of the Mean Machines magazine in October of '94, Sonic Anniversary PSP. It was announced in 2017 that a group of video game preservationists discovered a lost beta build of Sonic Generations for the PSP. The group, Obscure Gamers, acquired the disc in a corrupted state. The effort to recover assets from the corrupted disc was considerable, and the recovered assets were released in 2021. They discovered that Sonic Generations was originally called Sonic Anniversary, as displayed on the title screen from the disc. The group managed to retrieve multiple assets, like level textures for Mushroom Hill, which they released online for curious fans. Third Sonic Storybook game. The Sonic Storybook games consisted of Sonic and the Secret Rings and Sonic and the Black Knight, releasing for the Wii in both 2007 and 2009 respectively. It had always been rumored that a third game was in the cards, given that Sega had started labeling the games the Storybook series with the release of Black Knight, and after Sega had invited fans to partake in a poll to see what story they would want Sonic to explore next. Greek mythology won the poll. However, announcement of a third storybook game never came. Around that time, Sega was making a serious push to improve the reputation and quality of Sonic the Hedgehog games, delisting many poorly received Sonic games, like Sonic 06. The next 3 games for Sonic would be the Back to Basics Sonic 4 Episode 1, Sonic Colors, and Sonic Generations. Sonic Jr. For completeness sake, we'll include Sonic Jr. here, though there is no official confirmation of its existence. It was said to be a Sega Pico game, possibly similar to the Pico game Echo Jr. and the Great Ocean Treasure Hunt, which was released in 1994. There was a Sonic game released on Sega Pico, called Sonic the Hedgehog Game World in 1996, so it's also possible Sonic Jr. was an earlier title for Game World. Sonic the Fighters, Sega Saturn port. Although the fighting was still in Sonic's cartoonish style, the violence meant that Sonic the Fighters was limited to arcades in Japan. This is because Sega of America didn't want the brand perception to be that of violence. It only made it to America upon the release of the Sonic Gems collection in 2005. Maybe the reception of Super Smash Bros. Convinced Sega. Whatever the case, back in 1999, the game was rumored to be released by multiple magazine publications. However, according to Sega game designer Yojiro Ogawa, in an interview about Sonic Gems, the true experience of Sonic the Fighters was too difficult to replicate for Saturn consoles, noting that a proper version was released in Sonic Gems. Sonic 06, PC and Nintendo Wii version. Although the infamous Sonic 06 was originally released for the Xbox 360 and PS3, it was also planned to release for the PC and Wii. Eventually, the team decided there was too much effort involved in downporting the game to the Wii, as its hardware meant that Sonic 06 on the Wii would have had to have lower resolution textures, less data loading in at one time, and probably trimmed down content because of these technical limitations. Instead, the team changed course remorse and decided to develop something using the Wii's motion controls. That game became Sonic and the Secret Rings, the first game in the Sonic Storybook series. Sonic Unleashed PC port. Sonic Generations was built upon the codebase for Sonic Unleashed. This meant that the framework of the game had to be ported towards PC in order to start building Sonic Generations effectively. This leads some fans to believe that a Sonic Unleashed port may have been in the works. Images and various assets from Sonic Unleashed had been uncovered from Sonic Generations files, indicating the level of crossover during development. However, no official announcements have ever been unleashed for this PC port, though we do have footage of Unleashed running on PC from a developer talk, and there is also a great mod for Sonic Generations that features all the daytime stages from Unleashed. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles iOS and Android port. After developers Christian Whitehead and Simon Tomley, aka The Taxman and Stealth in their online aliases, had finished work on the Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 remasters for mobile, they thought that Sonic 3 should have the same treatment. They produced a prototype working on both iOS and Android in 2014, which is publicly viewable, but was ultimately rejected by Sega due to their unwillingness to unravel a messy legal situation regarding Michael Jackson, 80s band The Jetsons, and the Sonic 3 OST. Essentially, MJ's music team is adamant that they'd spent 4 weeks creating the OST for Sonic 3, which was denied by Sega, apart from STI's director Roger Hector, who claims it to be true, clarifying that MJ's association was dropped as soon as accusations about him came out. Yet, Michael Jackson's team claims that their tracks are still used in the game, and they only go uncredited because they weren't happy with how the music sounded from the console. To back this up, they pointed to the track from the Ice Cap Zone, which sounded suspiciously similar to a song by the Jetsons, who had Michael Jackson's musical director Brad Buxer on keyboard. Yes, we said it was messy. This dispute is still being avoided, as by the time Sonic Origins would release, Sonic 3 had to have whole new songs composed, with some tracks being adapted by composer Jun Seno from original music composed in 1993, before Jackson's team's involvement. Sonic Chronicles Sequel. The original Sonic Chronicles, The Dark Chronicles, was an RPG developed by BioWare and released by Sega in 2008 for the Nintendo DS. In fact, it's the only RPG in the franchise to date. The game had mixed reviews on release, with reviewers emphasizing its low difficulty, simplicity, and appeal to the younger fanbase. The game ended on a cliffhanger, with Eggman taking over the world and the mention of a sequel. However, details of the sequel were only discovered in July 2023, when the lead designer, Miles Holmes, discussed the sequel in an interview with Did You Know Gaming. BioWare had gotten as far as designing a rough storyline for the game, involving Sonic and his co separating after crashing back to Earth, and banding back together as the game progressed to take on Argus, the god mentioned in the first game. Holmes suggested the game might feel a bit like Back to the Future Part 2, with Eggman taking over in a similar fashion to Biff from Back to the Future. We would have seen Earth's landmarks like the Eiffel Tower and others remade in Eggman's image. After release, Sega and BioWare had some legal trouble with the infamous Archie Sonic writer Ken Penders. Penders felt that the story in Chronicles was too close to his Dark Legion Echidna storyline from Sonic & Knuckles comics. Sega's court battles with Penders would be settled after a few years, without rights to make a sequel. Even if they had said rights, by then it was too late. EA had bought BioWare, so they wouldn't be taking work from other publishers, such as Sega. One of the few mentions of content from the Chronicles game is the appearance of Nocturne in Mario & Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games for the Wii, and it's unlikely we will see further mention of this game. Make sure to like the video and subscribe! Check out our episode on Sonic 2 Time Travel and Sonic Triple Trouble and its fan game remake. Join our Discord, active with gamers and indie developers alike. Link in the description. Sonic fans welcome. Thanks for watching. This has been a GameFAQs special.